Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the LifeRaft Physical Security Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Value. And today I'm joined with my special co-host for this episode, Neil Spencer.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me back.
And today our guest is Mike Evans, Head of Intelligence at Securitas UK. Now, Mike, when we chatted last week, you made a really interesting point about the amount of awful intel that's out there as it relates to kind of producing useful intelligence for decision makers. What do you think everyone should stop doing?
Thankfully, I wasn't recorded when the words awful intelligence were said, so you can't prove that was me. But secondly, I would challenge even the statement of the word and use of the word intelligence. There's a lot of providers out there, and indeed a lot of in-house teams as well, that are just chucking around information because it's something they've seen or heard over the grapevine or from a friend at the pub, or it's on whatever media source they're monitoring at that point in time. And that for them, they believe is intelligence. But without it being processed, without being asked the so what if, and what can be done about it, it's not intelligence yet. It's still just information, which means that you send it on to a decision maker and they're not actually ready to make a decision based on it because they don't know the full picture yet because you haven't provided them with it. So I think that the biggest thing that a lot of outfits out there, whether or not they're as a provider in the commercial space or indeed in-house, is making sure and looking at that concept of operations that what you are producing is intelligence, it's finished intelligence, and it's good to go. It's ready for action.
I think you had a good way of framing it. A lot of organizations are doing stuff, but they're not necessarily doing intelligence.
It's the ones and the zeros. It's still in data or information format. And that may be because they're just passing it on straight away, or because they haven't yet defined what the output needs to look like. It's simple things like having templates that give you, as we would call it, the priority intelligence. Here's the 3 to 5 things you need to know if you can only have time to read 3 to 5 things, with then the background and the situation in detail. And most importantly, the assessment. Here's what this means now. Here's what it means next. And here's ultimately the so what to you, Mr. or Mrs. or whoever it may be, decision maker.
So part of the goal here is to help educate the listeners around if they were to walk into an organization tomorrow and have to set up an intel unit from the ground up. So I think you touched a little bit about sort of having those procedures and frameworks in place. What would be sort of 2 or 3 of your key takeaways, key foundational processes to put into place?
The first one will almost always be, what is it the customer, which is very open-ended depending on what environment you're operating in, what is it the customer wants to know, first and foremost? It's all well and good starting to throw information at someone, but if it's not something that they want to know, they will soon turn off from it. Secondly, it is about how they want to know. And that's when you really start looking at your concept of operations, looking at daily, weekly, monthly reporting, ad hoc or kind of in additional reporting based on those requirements. Is it verbally? Is it written? Or indeed, are there existing reporting requirements that your customer has, such as we have an MI pack. Can we have some intel in there as well, please? And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, is making sure that you do have those tools and templates and processes set up. So what is it that the customer wants to know? How do they want to know? And then making sure you're ready to deliver on that, not just once, not just twice, but again and again and again. Anyone can write a report from Google, open source, but doing that again and again, that is where the real challenge comes in.
Can you give kind of an example of what that might look like in like a practical sense?
So from the way we operate internally, one of the things that we do is focusing heavily on situational awareness, which I know there's lots of differing definitions of what situational awareness is, but in short, because conscious of time, I don't want to spend an hour looking for definition. Situational awareness means here's a situation, be aware of it.
We're getting some laughs here on the Zoom feed that people can't see, but
that's fine. We like the thumbs up as well on Teams. Hey,
nothing wrong with the KISS principle. We like it.
Hey. But essentially, we've got something called a situational awareness log. Hey, it's all in the name. That we track all the significant flashpoints in any given year, month, day, week, etc. And we look for those flashpoints so that when things then occur around and about the world that could then see an escalation as because of one of these flashpoints, whether or not it's an anniversary, an election, whatever it may be, it's something to be aware of. It's the situation and here's to be aware of it. So with that in mind, when you are putting products together, having that backdrop of information, because it is information, and then putting it into the reports with everything else that's going on. So we have a situational awareness log that allows us to track all the flashpoints throughout the year. These could be elections, they could be anniversaries of terror attacks or significant events around the world. So by keeping all of these in view, and they are information until you apply the current incidents and threats indicators around the world. What we can do is that we can provide situational awareness to customers based on their specific requirements. And that's when you're really starting to provide intelligence, because you're taking information of things happening in the world and then going, what is it the customer wants to know based on their specifics, their industry, their sector, their locations. Maybe they're involved in certain things or have a direct or an indirect association with it. That is what allows you to then start providing reporting or alerting or briefs, whatever it may be, based on their requirement, both from here's the things we want to know about and also how we want to know about it. And that's making it actionable, because a customer isn't just receiving an email saying, this is what's happened today. It's this has happened. Here's the impact. Here's the potential impact. And here's some of the things you can do about it. But I suppose with Intel is not there to operate. That's down to the decision maker to enact a decision, but you can still feed them and provide them with options.
Right. I get like one of the keywords that I clued in there was just providing the specifics that the client's looking for their business. And then I guess where I go to next is like, why isn't that sort of intuitive? Like, why don't other people have that point of view already?
I think TBC on what your view of the intelligence cycle is, but one of the first very big important steps is things such as direction and capturing requirements. Now, the way we approach capturing requirements, and I think a lot of outfits could benefit from this approach, is to ask the question first of the customer, what is it you want to know about? Now, I've been on many receiving responses, which is, well, you're Intel, you should know, which is fine. But then that goes to the education side of life, because we have a very exhaustive questionnaire for onboarding customers that goes down through the very main levels of what sector do you work in, to what specific products and intellectual property do you want us to protect. But if you just start with that very open-ended question, what is it you want to know about? You will get things and requirements that you wouldn't capture elsewhere. The requirements, the way we treat them in 3 categories. One, which is protective intelligence requirements, the things you want to protect. Threat intelligence requirements, the things that keep you up at night. And then your service intelligence requirements, how is it you want to receive the intelligence? That's the point in time that once you ask those lovely open-end questions and started to educate them about protective, threat, and service, we can then start looking at the questionnaire and really getting to the depth of the details. But because the questionnaire is closed questions, you're limiting the customer if you give them that from the very get-go. We have got one customer, for example, who is in the kind of aerospace sector, and they would have initially just looked at the service from what can you tell us about security and threat? But by asking the very open-ended questions, one of the first things that we had in terms of requirement wasn't even from the security team, it was from procurement, who said, could you monitor the global chip shortage for us? The answer is yes, of course we can. And that also speaks to, don't just ask the security team what their requirements are. Go and ask a wide range of stakeholders. Go and ask someone from HR. Go and ask someone from finance. Go and ask marketing. Go and ask, in that instance, procurement. That's when you can really start to enable the business, because that's what security is there for. Security isn't there to stop the business from doing business, although there is a perception in some environments. Security is there to enable the business. And in the world where security is seen as a cost center, being actually able to enable business as intelligence within security, well, that helps the security perception of it being a cost center from actually becoming this is something a lot more. This is something a bit special.
And Mike, I think sort of to talk to your tailoring of intelligence to internal stakeholders, if you will, is that the way that you would look at it? So to make sure that you show value to those internal stakeholders, to make sure they get the best out of internal stakeholders, would you advocate, like say to HR, for InfoSec, for management, tailoring each of the intelligence briefs to each of those departments? Or are we looking at more North American terminology, cookie cutter type approaches to some of this?
I think it varies by the use case, and that is a bit of a slow shorter answer. But going back to here's the situation, be aware.
Yeah.
Even something that may be of interest specifically to HR may be something of interest to other departments as well that can help them provide action. With that in mind, I think there is a big use case, and we talk about this a lot internally, in looking at your audience, not just in terms of the cookie cutter approach of which department they want to know. It's actually about the audience level. So looking at it from a strategic, tactical, and an operational perspective. So if something is just going to impact one site from a, let's say, security incident perspective, then that's operational, boots on the ground. This is the intelligence that you need to protect that site. If there's a wide-ranging issue, then it comes to a tactical level, which is then for management to provide a decision on. And if it's a strategic level of intelligence, that's again going right up to the senior decision makers. So it's looking at the intelligence and asking not just who in the cookie cutter, but at to what level do you need this intelligence to go to? Strategic, direction, tactical, doing, or kind of middle decision making, and then on the operational side of life, delivering.
That makes a lot of sense. On my point again, so you gave a very clear guidance to lay out for you the where, the why. And I think, especially for many of our newer listeners, so a lot of that boils down to having a good intelligence collection plan, ICP. Would you then say, especially in the modern industry, you get a lot of temporary workers, so you'll get a lot of contract security staff coming through potentially. Would you say that helps, if you have a clear ICP, have that documented, would you say that helps with, scaling up that team and or indeed transitioning people in and out as you work through?
Very much so. I mean, particularly in this day and age of instant gratification, just chucking a few keywords into social media or give you some instantaneous results. And you can have someone coming in tomorrow and say, I've just found this fantastic piece of information that I'm now going to process into intelligence. But that being said, if you have a captured intelligence collection plan, which links back to the requirements that the customer has, you have something that you can continually develop and continually grow with. Intelligence is not just a product you go into the shop, get off the shelf and walk out with the checkout through. Intelligence is an advisory engagement. It is a service that it's a back and forth. It grows organically. You have to start somewhere, and over time it will be refined, not just because of your understanding of the customer or the business and their requirements, but also the world changes. If we were to say 2.5 years ago, go and look for COVID-19, it wouldn't have really appeared on the intelligence sphere. Whereas in the past 2 years, everyone now wants to know about COVID-19. But then that comes with the challenge of how do you manage the volume?
I mean, I could imagine a million different things that we could possibly be tracking. How do you kind of select down to the handful of topics that you think are going to be the most relevant for your clients 6, 12 months down the road?
Again, kind of harking straight back to the requirements, but at the same time, it's providing the intelligence on things that may not be specific to them yet, but giving them that early warning notification or that there's something emerging here within their situational awareness. So the way we structure some of our reports, for example, we have something called a monitoring update, which is an email-based brief that goes out first thing in the morning to the customers so that when they open their laptops or mobile phones or wherever it may be, first thing they see is that. Here's your morning intelligence brief based on your requirements. The top half of the brief is specific intelligence requirements because that's the bit that impacts you directly. But in the second half of the brief, it's split into something called the situational awareness section. And this is the part of the brief where we're starting to say this is what's happening in the wider sector or the wider geography of where you're operating in, if not specifically you. But also here's the items of intelligence interest that are starting to emerge that we want you to be aware of. Is the situation, be aware of it, so that when it becomes something, it's not a sudden surprise. So with COVID, for example, when it first was reported on the 31st December 2019, we put a shot across the bows to some of our customers and internally to say, there's a virus being reported in China. This is something to be aware of. Details are still emerging. So then when it started to pick up pace in early January, the customers were already read into it and go, I know what this is. So then when it then hits the global media circuit in such a big way in February, March time, our customers are ready for it and they're already having made plans for it becoming something. Whereas others who hadn't heard of it are sitting there going, what's this? And it's all about the forewarned is forearmed, as the saying goes. But for us, it's much about staying aware and taking care. So you're not scared when something does happen.
If I'm someone that wants to kind of create more actionable intelligence for clients, beyond that open-ended questions with customers, what would be step 1, step 2 for kind of doing better preparation in the intelligence cycle?
So the intelligence cycle is helpful. It is very useful for giving you an understanding of your subject matter and potentially how it can be done. Actually, actioning intelligence as a process is very different. So having the intelligence cycle as a reference sheet is useful, and having it stuck up on the wall is great for building that awareness within a team. But the way that we've approached it internally is that we're a commercial outfit. Our remit is very different to when you maybe are operating in a public sector sphere. So for example, if you are in the military, you may have a particular theater. Or if you are working in the police, you may have a particular postcode or particular crime groups, whatever it may be. But when you're in a commercial outfit such as ourselves and others out there in industry and internally, you will be dealing with everything from what's going on in crime and security, what's going on with terrorism, what's going on with natural disasters. So when you look at an intelligence cycle, you will automatically start to see, oh, we might need to split this up a little bit more for the necessary steps for the business purpose and our own purpose. We've got individuals who are from kind of management down to junior operator level. And it's good to then have that additional split out with the intelligence cycle to say, well, you're going to do that bit. You're going to support here with collection and processing. You may not necessarily do direction at this point in time, but you will in the future. Having that building the picture of how you do things is important. And the same thing with things like the principles of intelligence, like crosscat. It's useful to know, but then how do you actually use it? Same thing with Intel. How do you actually make it actionable? So when you're trying to provide to a customer and the necessary steps to do is one, build an understanding of how you can do things, build an understanding of what they need, and build an understanding of how to do it now, as in start answering those questions. Because the longer you take to get operational, the longer you take to have an impact. And that's the biggest thing with intelligence is having that impact, making every engagement better, providing that decision-making advantage and the confidence the decision you're making is the right one.
What would be a pretty common mistake that someone might make during that process?
Not actually answering the question that's being asked of them. Or, and this sounds really crazy, answering the question that's asked of them, but not what the customer meant. One of the big things that we experience is that you get a one-liner question into the mailbox saying, oh, we'd like to know about this. But what they actually meant to ask is, the board is interested in this. So we would like to provide a paper on this that gives them the yeses and the nos, the pros, the cons, etc. So when you get in an intelligence requirement, look at who's asking, look at the issue at hand, the message they want in return or the response, and then how you're going to give that. Is it going to be you're going to send a one-liner back saying, well, this is the assessment, or are you going to provide a full brief? Bear in mind the context at all points in time, because the request is there to make a decision upon. Can you support that?
Do you have any interesting examples from where answering the question when you shouldn't have has cropped up?
We get this a lot with personal security and very much with like protective intelligence engagements, where you've got maybe someone has received some communications that may or may not be malicious. And it's the question of, do we or do we not do something about this internally or engaging with law enforcement, etc. And this comes very much to the forefront when you're looking at things like repeated interactions from individuals that may or may not be malicious. And it's about providing as much information as possible without running down the rabbit hole of here's a bunch of PII, because that's not what they're after. You're providing an assessment on the potential threat. Is there intent? Is there capability? What actions can be taken here? Whereas if someone said, can I just have a profile on this person? There's a temptation to, here you go. Here's everything we know about them from social media. That's not the ask. The ask is, what is the threat? Is there a threat? If so, what can be done?
Getting at what's really being asked.
Yeah. So there will be a lot of, and you get that as well with things like, what's the business risk in the Philippines or something to that effect? Well, you can go away and provide a report on the business risk in the Philippines, but what's the actual question? Oh, we're looking at a market entry into the Philippines. What's the risks to us doing that? That's a very, very different question to the one you were sent, but that's the actual requirement.
And I can see like once you've done that kind of emotional detective work to figure out what they're really asking, that's going to go a lot longer towards making that intelligence useful for the decision maker. Where you just show up with that generic report. What am I going to do with this? Why do I need an intel unit?
Intelligence is very much, it is based on relationships. It's not just based on the requirements that here's the things we want to know. It's about you being able to provide that support, act as that trusted advisor to the customer, because that's when you start getting the WhatsApps at 9:30 on a Friday night saying, we didn't know about this. That's the best feedback you're ever going to get from a customer when they're sending you requirements at all hours and minutes of the day or the night, regardless of the working week. That's when you're in that ability to say, look, we are being useful. We are providing actionable intelligence. We are valuable. Just providing alerts about what's happening around the world in relation to the latest COVID-19 restrictions, information, intelligence is then being able to provide the so what if, what we've done about it. But the real impact is when the customer is coming back to you and asking for support on things that you may not otherwise be engaged in.
And I think, Mike, that sort of comes back to, and actually I'm going to ask you briefly to define the intelligence cycle, because people may or may not who are listening may or may not be aware of it. So I think it sort of speaks back to, I think, some of the earlier points you made about kind of the continual interaction with stakeholders. So as part of that intelligence cycle, making sure that feedback loop is, it's closed off at the top of that intelligence cycle so that you can feed back into it as a cycle for a reason. That is a continuous engagement really with those stakeholders at the end. So you're able to define the intelligence cycle for those who may not be aware. And then, so it speaks to, I guess, the importance of making sure there is that iterative approach.
I'm going to use a very similar approach to my definition for situational awareness in that it's a cycle for producing intelligence. We really need to be careful with, particularly in our field, which is regarded as a dark art and a dark science at the best of times, about over-engineering things. The intelligence cycle is about producing and processing and performing the functions of intelligence. It's about capturing requirements, collecting upon them, processing and providing a finished product that is then reviewed. That being said, intelligence is not a self-licking lollipop, as was once said. It does have a use, not just of its own. So when you are getting to the review stages, it's not just about reviewing the intelligence that has been gathered and produced and then exploiting that for further use within intelligence of life. Review is about reviewing the performance of the intelligence function. Could we have done better at collection? Have we answered the customer's question? Can we learn anything from the way we have produced this finished report so we can do it better in the future? It's not just about intelligence, the product. It's about the service and the performance of that.
I like that idea of seeing the intelligence as the service and it's creating something actionable, like a product. The same thing like a marketing team would be thinking, is this useful for customers? Getting that feedback from the marketplace, are sales going up? Whereas just the feedback that you're looking for isn't necessarily customers showing up at the cashier every day. It's just getting the questions and getting that engagement is the feedback from the marketplace.
At the end of the day, particularly in the private sphere, it's a competitive marketplace amongst you and competitors. But then that being said, when you're then in-house in particular, again, you are more than likely part of a security function, which is a cost center. So there's a competitive side of life there. But ultimately, your biggest competitor is the adversary that you're trying to work against or trying to mitigate the threat from. So you have to be mindful of that. It's not just about the service. It's not just about the quality of that, but it is, can we do more next time and every time and any time against whatever adversary we face, whether it's weather or criminal, whatever it may be.
Well, and then the other adversary is just the other stakeholders in the business that also want budget for the same resources.
But then is there any stakeholder in the business that intelligence can't not help? I would argue you could probably provide decision advantage and confidence to anyone. And that goes to then the education, and that goes very much then to the engagement and ongoing relationship building across the business. Because every time we meet someone within a business, whether it's in security or otherwise, one of the first things they'll say if you've not interacted with intelligence before is, we didn't know we could do that.
So Mike, coming up all the time that I promised to steal from you today. So why don't you tell the audience what kind of projects you're working on now?
It's year end at the point in time of us recording this, which I'm sure will be beginning of year when this goes out.
When this goes up, yeah.
Year beginning. So the big focus at this point in time, as for a lot of outfits, would probably be our intelligence estimate for the following year, what's coming up for the next 12 months. But again, the question of that being actionable. Who's actually going to use the ins and outs, every line item of that style of report. So for us, it's continually looking at the way we communicate intelligence, because alerts and reports, whether they're daily, weekly, are always useful. But if that stakeholder or recipient doesn't have the time to read it from end to end, they may miss things. And dashboards, again, are the same thing. They look great. They look really pretty. I do like a color. But if it's not actually being able to communicate effectively what you're trying to tell someone, they may skip over it. So we are continuing to look at our products, and new and existing, of course, that allow us to make sure that when someone needs to know something, the priority intelligence, they know it. And a big part of that for us is our monitoring updates, because they are so impactful and so effective. We issue them in the morning and you'll get 5-10 questions within the first 15 minutes back. That's where you know you're making an impact. If things are just going out and you're sitting there going, I wonder if these are being read. Here's a challenge. Don't send it for a day or two and see what happens. And that's when you can start telling if you're having that impact or not. It's about looking at the things that are needed and the things that are very much wanted, to sound very, very cliche. But at the end of the day, if you can make that difference to someone's decision-making on that day, that's the thing that matters most. And it's that engagement. That's the important thing, not just about sending things out there into the internet ether. We like to think of ourselves as a tell, task, and triage outfit. Tell, we'll tell you about things you want to know about. Task, task us away to go and do things. But triage, when it matters, then we know we can work with you. We know you're going to come calling and we're going to be there to support you with it.
All right, Mike. And if listeners want to reach out to you, where can they get in touch?
I'm contactable on most social media channels, very much LinkedIn. Hey, we all need a social media presence in this day and age, even if we say make sure they're safe and secure. But beyond that, we have got a mailbox for the SIU, which is intelligence@securitas.uk.com.
Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
Again, that was Mike Evans, Head of Intelligence at Securitas UK. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the LifeRaft Physical Security Podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, or whatever else you listen to your podcast. And I hope you tune in next time.